I hesitated to finalise my presentation, not quite knowing whether anybody would be here bleary-eyed having stayed up all night. I must confess I got the numbers right, I just got the labels the wrong way round. And it's interesting, as somebody who is spending his time trying to foresee what 2050 will look like in a city, I spent yesterday afternoon in a Leverhulme project-funded workshop visioning Nottingham as part of a 5-year project to look at Shanghai, Chengdu, Stuttgart, and Nottingham. It's been a pleasure and a delight to go back 100 years and see what Patrick Geddes was writing about while the First World War was in full flight. This morning on the train down from Nottingham, I was exchanging emails with a close friend who works for the French Geological Survey. We were lamenting and looking forward. She was asking, how would I be involved in Framework 9 research projects? And I won't share my answer with you, but the answer was sufficiently positive for her to reply with a little smiley. So, what does a Scot have to tell us from 100 years ago about where we are today? Well, Nottingham brands itself Britain's global university. We have campuses in China and Malaysia. I have colleagues who were in the room with me yesterday from Finland, Germany, France, Portugal. The future would have been uncertain whatever happened today, and Britain will remain a major global player, as indeed will my university. My company, Land Quality Management, many of you may not have heard of it, but if you're involved in brownfield redevelopment and you've commissioned somebody to assess the soil contamination on your site, you have probably used the book on the bottom right-hand corner, the suitable for use levels, to decide whether or not contaminants are a problem. But we're also looking at solutions, and the top left-hand slide, Data for Sustain, is a project we're just finishing next week on looking at the potential on redevelopment sites for renewable energy, a partnership with the Geological Survey and other companies and institutions in Nottingham. That's the tagline for today's conference. And that's my take-home messages. I want you to think of brownfields as sites of opportunity. I want you to realize that financial viability depends on quality. Stack them up, sell them cheap is not going to work. The environmental risk that brownfield sites pose is much less than you're usually told. The effective use of data and mapping is essential, because that which you do not understand, you cannot manage, and therefore you will spend more than you need to. We need to build communities that will last. We need to build communities that are functioning, connected. And sometimes, particularly if we come into an area, develop and move on, we tend to forget that it's about places for people. What about effective infrastructure? Well, that's the glue that holds everything together. It's the arteries which allow people, energy, goods, services to flow. It's the electric current, if you like, that makes everything happen. Well, are brownfields the only option? On the right, you see the footprint of some of the global metropolitan areas. Some big, some small, some sprawling, some compact. Mark Twain talked about buying land they're not making anymore. Well, cities can only grow, and they are growing, by either building up or down, or out, or rebuilding on the same spot. Not discarding land, not throwing it away, but reusing it. And increasingly designing and constructing, knowing that the land will be reused, knowing that the land will be recycled, knowing that as well as being in a circular economy, there is also a circular land use. In October, in Quito, will be the Habitat 3 convention. The zero draft of the new urban agenda talks about a new moment in history where more than half of us will live in an urban area, rising to 70%. The future is urban. The future is in the littoral as well as the urban. And that presents both challenges and opportunities. So who was this Patrick Geddes? Well, here he is pictured on the right-hand side in 1923. By living, we learn. He has been described as a variety of different ways: a pioneer of sociology, a seminal influence on sociology, a biologist, and a town planner. It's a strange combination. His principal lasting document is Cities in Evolution, and I would encourage you to download it and read it. He recognizes, this is writing in 1915, that despite our contemporary difficulties, both industrial, social, and political, this was 1915 the year, not 1915 last night, I should point out. He still sees opportunities. He still sees a possibility for a general advancement to a higher plane. Why does he matter? Well, in his attempt to understand and then create the urban, he realized that you really need a unified, truly interdisciplinary perspective. You need your specializations, you need your disciplines, but they have to work together as one. And interestingly, because one of the things that he is famous for is his master plan for Tel Aviv, is that he was concerned about existing cities, not just new ones. Most of the cities that will be full by 2050 already exist. And it's what we do within those cities that matters. And he recognized that. The problem, though, is that being a visionary doesn't mean that others share that vision or follow you. Few have been prepared to follow Geddes' ambition to bridge the chasm between nature and culture, environment and society, geography, biology, and sociology. I stand before you today as a chartered geologist, a graduate of natural sciences, whose career has spent entirely not in geological departments. It began in the built environment at Nottingham Trent University, and then in the School of Chemical, Environmental and Mining Engineering in Nottingham, and now in the School of Geography, where I run the research group on environment and society. These are not words that sit comfortably together: nature and culture, geography and sociology. And yet they are essential if we're going to build cities that will last and stand the test of time. Geddes was a curious child. He liked to explore his surroundings, and that curiosity evolved into becoming, I guess, what we would now call an ecologist. He tended to think in terms of the interactions between plants, animals, and the environment in which they live. A systems approach, if you will. In later years, he encouraged and facilitated people to be able to see their city. He created a place in Edinburgh where you could go at a great height and look down on the capital of Scotland, a vantage point for viewing your city. And my slide illustrates both the London Eye and the open-top bus tours, ways that we can quickly gain an overview of a new place. He emphasized time and time again this basic need for visual awareness. The sight of St. Paul's as I walked down to this building today was awe-inspiring. The history, the irony of some of the advertisements, the sense of a change this morning was palpable. And you had to be in London to experience it. It's not enough to read the tweets or the newspapers or watch it on the news. So this basic need for visual awareness is important as we go about redeveloping our sites. But what of Tel Aviv, the first Hebrew city? That is anchored in a neighborhood of Jaffa, of cake and orange fame, if you will. He saw it as being both a part of Palestine and a logical extension of the ancient city of Haifa. The modern city had to grow from history. And on the right, you see the master plan circa 1926. the basic layout of large blocks created by north-south and east-west cross streets that were intersected by narrower access lanes was adhered to. An American city, if you will, but built in Mediterranean, Middle Eastern scale and size and compactness and density and interaction potential. Round about the same time, the Garden City concept, today you can hear about it from the Town and Country Planning Association, talked about a new town designed as a whole with much open space and greenery. Geddes, by 1910, had talked about a synergistic, large-scale regional planning. Regions are those things we got rid of 5 or 6 years ago. His goal was to integrate urban and rural ways of life into a regional civilization or a region city. Think about green infrastructure, think about green corridors, think about blue-green cities. These are current buzzwords that he would have understood 100 years ago. And on the right, you see a picture that echoes the shape of Tel Aviv, but that's in the Netherlands. That's the Westergasfabriek, an old gasworks site that is now on the edge of Amsterdam, and you begin in the urban, and if you walk away from the old round gasometer, you move into the rural. That transition of the urban and rural is happening and can happen elsewhere too. He also envisaged the rise of what I'm calling the supra-metropolis. On the left, a government document about one agenda, one economy, one north. It's interesting to delve into history, isn't it, and see what historical documents look like. I think that's vintage 2015. He talked about a greater Lancashire. He talked about Lancaston, West Riding, South Riding, Midlondon, which is where I live, Nottingham, Leicester, Derby, Loughborough fused into one. He talked about Clyde Forth, which is great if you're standing from a distance, but not so good if you consider yourself to be a Glaswegian or a fan of Hartland and Lothian. He was a big fan of maps. He encouraged his reader to go to the library and open up the Royal Geographical Atlas of England and Wales, published ironically in Edinburgh by Bartholomew's. In that, there is a map of population, in the original in colour, in his book, lamentably only in black and white. He talks about this octopus of London, polypus rather, is something curious, exceedingly a vast irregular growth without previous parallel in the world of life, perhaps likest to the spreadings of a great coral reef. Remembering that he was a biologist, an ecologist, the idea finds its echoes in today's theories of urban metabolism, and I have the slides here from the Urban Metabolism Laboratory at MIT, talking about material and energy flows arising from urban socioeconomic activities and regional and global biogeochemical processes. The urban as an organism, a deeply multidisciplinary research domain. Never mind research, it's multidisciplinary in practice as well. So we see the echoes of that ecologist's mind in some of the most cutting-edge, groundbreaking theories of today. He talked about a house province spreading over, absorbing a great part of southeast England in 1915. He allows the Lord Mayor of London, in whose area we stand, and his corporation to survive. How generous of him. He welcomes the historic monuments just outside the window. But he talks about local autonomy too. Now, I was going to use that local autonomy to link it into neighborhood plans and localism, and I'm going to leave it at that. But what about today? Well, actually, this is about yesterday. That's why the present is in scary quote marks, as we call it at university. I guess all this should be taken in the past tense, or potentially in the future. The government views brownfield land as a key enabler for delivering housing. It allocated £1.2 billion for building houses on brownfield land. The consultation on the revisions to the National Planning Policy Framework last year led to a number of responses, and the House of Commons Select Committee of Communities and Local Government has recommended to the department that it needs, if it's going to use brownfields as a policy target, as a fund allocation mechanism, that it really needs to get a better definition of brownfield than we currently have in the National Planning Policy Framework. If you look out the window and you look at St. Paul's, that is previously developed land. Last time I looked, that wasn't a brownfield. I said I was a European. Well, it's no good just criticizing. This is the definition that has been adopted across Europe, in China, other parts of the world. And I put this forward as the definition that CLG should adopt if they're going to be sensible about funding and policy allocation for brownfields. Cabinet is the concerted action of brownfield and economic regeneration network, and I'll talk about the little picture in a minute. But think of brownfields as sites that have been affected by their former land uses. They might have become derelict or underused. They don't have to be contaminated. That's the American way of doing things. They may be contaminated, but that's not the point. The point is they are under or unemployed sites and they require intervention to bring them back into beneficial use. Now the puzzle. I'm sure as a child you would have got one of these things and you were frustratingly trying to slide the pieces around to get the numbers into the right order to make a picture. Brownfields are that empty square. They are that potential to move things around without locking up the system. That's why they're an opportunity, not a problem. The NPPF talks about creativity if we are to achieve sustainable development. Gosh, if this morning we don't need creativity and innovation, we have never needed it. Securing the future. There are 5 guiding principles. Some of these will make you smile wryly. Living within the planet's environmental limits. Ensuring a strong, healthy, and just society. Achieving a sustainable economy. Promoting good governance. And using sound science responsibly. That's the touchstone that we are needing to work with this morning. What about financial viability? This is an area that will become a hot topic as planning applications are considered, approved, rejected, and appealed by local authorities around the country. Where I live, a very protected piece of land is subject to a planning application, and the local authority has commissioned a viability report in order to see what liability it would have if it either approved or turned down the planning application. It talks about providing competitive returns to a willing landowner and a willing developer. So viability is a concept that will come back, perhaps not to bite us, but to nibble at our ankles. And please don't be taken in when you hear talk about brownfield registers. There is no such thing, there will be no such thing. What there is are registers of suitable brownfield sites, of sites that are ready to be taken off the unemployment register, to be fully reused. Not all sites are able to be so used. David Edwards is an old friend. He set up a not-for-profit organization called Excite, and we worked together on a European regeneration project called Rescue. Well, maybe we could do some rescuing today. He's not the first person to have said this, but he was the person who first said it to me. If you don't know where you're going, how will you know when you've got there? Well, that presumes that there's a destination, and sustainability is not a destination. It's a way of living. It's a journey. Cities can grow and shrink, succeed and fail, succumb and recover, thrive and stagnate. Occasionally, they do go extinct. And if you've been looking at the archaeological news in the last couple of weeks, you'll have seen cities of a scale unimagined and unknown discovered in remote parts of the world. Well, remote to London anyway. Now, the challenge on that journey is to make sure that the short-term needs are met without compromising that long-term vision and that long-term trajectory. That's the challenge. You can't only be thinking on 25, 30-year timescales. You've got to think about tomorrow and the year after as well. So in closing, this is a quote about a vision of Britain. For a long time, I have felt strongly about the wanton destruction which has taken place in this country in the name of progress, about the sheer unadulterated ugliness and mediocrity of public and commercial buildings and of housing estates, not to mention the dreariness and heartlessness of so much urban planning. If you'd been here in 1989 when these words were written, this place would have met that definition. He was derided for those words, but I challenge you to go and look at pictures of Paternoster Square and then go outside and look at this building and look at this neighborhood and then ask yourself, was he so wrong? But vision isn't enough. It's about having a policy and a plan and practices and performing so that those objectives can be delivered. Interdisciplinarity matters. Localism matters, making decisions that are appropriate for the community. Thinking about urban metabolism, thinking of the city as an organism where things happen and grow and die. Recognizing that being able to see is a prerequisite to delivering. Recognizing that listening, as I'm looking forward to doing for most of today after speaking for 20 minutes, is a prerequisite to that shared understanding that we fostered in Cabernet and need today more than ever. History is there and needs to be recognized and built on, hopefully not repeated. And that urban-rural connection, that urban-rural nexus is crucial if we're going to develop cities that we want to live in rather than cities that we have to live in. And so my picture of the Babel fish, perhaps a bit more apocalyptic this morning than I'd intended it to be, is about the need to speak in languages and understand what each other's saying. And I don't just mean between French and English or German, but between geology and planner and lawyer and sociologist. So my take-home messages are these. But I didn't want to leave you on a down note. I'm going to take you through a very rapid journey of recent successes. Strap in, enjoy. Thank you.